and welcome to the Truth and Data podcast, where we tackle a different digital forensics topic each week. I'm Jessica,
I'm Kim.
I'm Debbie.
and this week we're going to be talking about the changing role of digital forensics, the digital detective of the future. This is an interesting topic because you might be sitting there going, what are they talking about? And we're
hmm
really talking about the evolving landscape and how those folks who are responding to scenes may not include forensic lab personnel and what that means for our future. So, Debbie, I know you were really, really keen on this topic, so maybe you could kick us off on this.
So, as technology is changing, and especially mobile phones, and it's becoming more and more important to acquire and extract data on scene, and lab personnel are not always able to, for a variety of reasons, not always able to go on scene. I believe that we are at a point where some agencies, many agencies, are going to have to make the decision to train first responders to at least acquire and extract on scene. And by first responders, so for example, in CSAM world and ICAP world, it is not uncommon for a report to be made to a police department about someone grooming their child, and they sent pictures to this child, or the child sent pictures to someone else, or someone received unsolicited photos. A first responder goes out, a patrol officer answers that call, just goes out to get initial data. There are times where they are emailing those photos to themselves, where they are taking photos on their own phone of the photo. So knowing how to properly seize evidence is going to be critical. And also, just whether it's a any sort of crime scene, being able to acquire and extract on scene is becoming more and more important. And I think we're going to have to train personnel to do that.
So,
Or even to identify, I feel
Yes.
like.
Oh,
Let's just
yes.
even be able to identify that there may very well be digital
Yes.
evidence in there. So we can talk about, proper acquisition and what needs to happen when you see it, but what happens when you don't see it and you leave it?
A
so
hundred percent.
yeah, from a technical perspective, I'd like to bring in the point that collections at the lab and delayed collections are going to cause problems and potential loss of data. What's really great that was done in the new I guess let me give some of those examples, and then I'll say where there's some good resources around this. So some of those examples could be stolen device protection is turned on a device, which means the device may not be able to be acquired away from its original location. It could be that the device we want to maintain devices in the after first unlock state so that we can access a large percentage of the data even without the passcode. It could be that we have concerns about dead man switches. So if the device is out of the owner's hands and they're unable to put in a key at some specified interval, the device may wipe itself. And this is just a couple. So the the days of a Faraday bag and a battery with the phone in the battery bag are long gone. Never mind that there are temporal artifacts that such as the geolocation data available on iOS devices, the really really rich data which we lose a day every day, but there's only 7 days worth of it. After 7 days there's none of it. So if geolocation, oh my gosh, geolocation being important in a case, go figure, is important to your case, that time to imaging is really important. And we think about some of these larger states where actually getting it to the forensics lab, if it's a state police level incident, Buffalo is not near Albany, nor is Garden City, Long Island, right? These are not feasible things for immediately that device to be driven to the lab for exploitation. So it's really important that we democratize the collection of evidence so that we're not losing it from a technical perspective. And I'll say that what is really important here is the concept of preservation. And I know I've said this quite a few times, but I am a proponent right now that acquisition is preservation. We have a whole episode on that I'll refer you to. But what's really cool that's kind of come out of these newer changes is the newest um, best practices from mobile acquisitions actually is broken down into two charts. And the top chart is all about preservation and exigency, and then the second one is about the actual acquisition. And to me, that exigency and preservation of data, ensuring that we don't lose data just because it's not handled quote unquote properly on scene, is really, really critical. Now, I'm not saying that every detective or every law enforcement person who's needs a gray key in the trunk of their patrol car, that would be cost prohibitive. However, they do need to know, as Kim was saying, what to collect, how to properly seize and keep the data in the most correct state, how to identify some common anti-forensics techniques, and how to be able to safely transport it back to the lab and properly share information about prioritization about that acquisition. And, I say this from a certain realm because to me this isn't brand new. I know we're saying it's because the landscape is changing, but, when in 2010, I wrote the first, for me, the first time I wrote a digital forensics for first responders for mobile evidence class, and I wrote that for quote unquote door kickers in the DoD because they were coming upon evidence and they needed to just know what to do on how to seize it and protect it. And that class I wrote 15 years ago would be completely irrelevant today, right? Like that class 15 years ago was based on feature phones and all kinds of different circumstances. But what I'm saying is the concept of needing to democratize in different environments has always been there, and maybe we can take some of those lessons learned from having to do that in the military and DoD space into the law enforcement space of 2025.
We had, there was an amount of time in there where one of the things I feel like that was most important was when we would go to a search warrant and you would see computers that were left on, and we're like, oh, let's get the RAM. That was a matter of let's train everybody so that whenever we're on scene, make sure that you're able to get the RAM, and make sure that to get the RAM, make sure that everybody is going on scene. The examiners should they know how to do this, they've got what they need, all that stuff. So then it was just like, okay, well, let's take the phones, right? Let's identify everything and let's take the phones. And that was kind of all you had to quote worry about from a time perspective then, was just, let's just take it after you get to the RAM. That was what was the most time sensitive piece of evidence that you needed to collect. But things have changed considerably since then. And we're actually not just talking about on scene where there's a search warrant and where something's planned. We're talking about, on the side of the road, someone's pulled someone over and figured out, hey, something else is going on. And right then
and they have a phone.
Yes. Right. But with the changes, with search incident to an arrest from Riley and back in 2014, so now we're almost talking 10 years ago, they also need to be educated on what to write to be able to now seize that piece of evidence depending on the jurisdiction. And I think you bring up a really, really good point about the evolving crime scene, how the most important thing we wanted to train them on is RAM. But now, myself and Sarah Hayes, we just spent 3 months going all around the country teaching people on what to seize and what was important to seize in terms of IoT devices, and how, yes, you should take the TV, and yes, you should take the door of the refrigerator, but no, you don't need to take the light bulb. It probably doesn't have much data, and how you can tell in charts and all of that information, with the IoT forensics. And so now we're getting into this other realm of how many monitors are there. Are we making note, if we go and we have a warrant for seize everything on the inside of the house, do we then need to make a note about all of the cameras And Ring doorbells on the outside of the house, are they actually included? Do they need to be requested? Noting if there's floodlights that have cameras, right? I've seen these have evidence in recent days, in recent cases. So we have to be, the investigators and the folks who are entering a premises and seizing and collecting evidence need to be that much more aware of what in the world could be of evidentiary value. And some IoT devices really are not of evidentiary value, and some are of lots of evidentiary value. And again, like I said, the door fridge on a smart fridge is absolutely full of all kinds of information. So, and we did an IoT episode. Sarah was actually a guest on that one, so folks can check that out. But it's a different space. It's very different. And what will it look like 10 years from now?
Well, that's exciting, and I don't want to. Scary is not the right word, but
I'm scared of it. I'm scared of it. What about when those things are weaponized? Now, remember, I come from the counter IED world.
Right.
That's where I started, was doing forensics for terrorist explosive devices. So now with the commonality of this, that's very scary to me.
I guess one thing that does bring just a little bit of comfort is the fact that technology is constantly changing. And for all these years, every time there was something new, we were like, oh my goodness, what about this? Oh my goodness, what about this? And maybe it is getting more in depth, more technical, have more capabilities. I get that. But also we've been able to deal with change. And that's what our jobs are as examiners, right?
And,
I mean,
yeah.
You are constantly learning something new because you have to, because technology is changing. So there is a bit of comfort in the change because it's always changing.
In 2013, someone walked into my lab and said, your field is dead because of encryption. This job won't exist in 10 years. And I was like, I really doubt that. It's just a game of cat and mouse. And he was like, no, encryption's destroying your field. And so this was in 2013. So this was 12 years ago. And last time I checked, we all still have jobs. So,
well, now it's AI. Now it's, people are talking about AI.
AI can't. So let's talk about.
But they're talking about the same thing,
right? So the digital detective of the future, right, probably will have AI in their toolbox. However, because of what Kim talked about, because things are changing at such a rapid pace, because we cannot even yet imagine what problems we'll be dealing with in 2035, there is no AI can only work from the body of knowledge in which it knows. It's really good at that. What us as humans are really good at is dealing with unknowns. And, I to say the brazen thing, every time you knock on a door, it's an unknown. Right? You never know what's going to be behind that door. You may have some understandings about stuff from a tip or stuff that you've had from surveillance or knowing a case, but until you get in, you don't know what devices there may be, and then until you get into the devices, you don't know what data there may be. I mean, how many times have you worked a case that was one type of case and you saw evidence of a completely different type of case?
Certainly.
It happens.
I mean, that it happens more times than I'd like, because then you have to go and do more paperwork.
So what do we think is realistic? So what do we think is realistic as far as who is going to be trained and to what level?
I think one thing where things need to start is really at the laboratory. You need to, of course, your lab folks need to be trained up, and they need to have the tools that they need in order to be able to accommodate what is going to be brought to the lab, right? So, I mean, that's your first thing, because it doesn't do you any good to train the folks in the field if you're not capable of even doing anything with it once it gets there.
Don't pull the TV if you have no one who can actually take the chip off.
Yes. Yeah. So, or, put it in evidence and find somebody in another agency that can look at your list, resources, whatever. Right. But exactly, why are we going to go out and this
train
may be
first responders?
Yeah. Let's go train them. Right. So let's say that we do have a laboratory that is able and is available and can take this evidence. Then I think that is one of the first things is training folks at the very first of their, a police training with that agency. And then also looking at these folks, because most of them, all of them, are going to be required to do some regular in-service, continuing education training each year. Okay, make that part of that. Make that a mandatory, however many hours.
So
2 hours, yeah, just 2 hours annual training. But yes, I think it needs to start in the academy, how to identify and seize properly digital evidence.
not to go into two different categories, but there are two different groups of people who don't get exposure to digital evidence in their basic preliminary training for the fields. It drives me nuts. Police officers and legal professionals. Not to go into a different topic, but they don't teach digital evidence in most law schools. So how do we, ensure that everyone has an understand? And if we're talking about the difference between now and 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it's that digital evidence is at every scene. There's not a case that doesn't involve digital evidence in today's world. Everything has digital evidence. Is it always used? No. But does it typically exist? Absolutely. And, one of the reasons that it may be being missed is because, or it may not be properly seized, or we may be losing data, is because the awareness isn't out there. I think it's getting out there. And I will say one thing that does help as newer people are coming through the academies and through into investigative roles, guess what? They're digital natives. They've had devices their entire life. So it's
and
a little bit
attorneys.
different.
Yes,
Attorneys
and
as well.
yes.
Right. So as younger people come through, they already, it's not like our generation where only the nerds were the ones who had, computers at home or built them themselves or etc. Everyone has a smartphone today, but people who are digital natives, I think, have a different understanding of how engrossed technology can be. I'll give the most basic example, which is I was traveling for work with one of our younger employees, so an employee in their 20s. I am definitively not in my 20s. You may think so looking at me, but I am not. And
we are too.
Right. We all appear to be in our 20s, but just so you know, the three of us are a little more mature. So I was traveling with one of my employees who was in his 20s, and I was in the rental car and I was the driver. And I looked behind me to pull out and I said, I really don't like this car. The rear view is so small. And he just looks at me and he's like, there's a backup camera. And I'm like, it never would have occurred to me to look through a backup camera because
You're used to mirrors.
Well, I'm frugal and my car doesn't even have, well, not only am I frugal, I am so aware of digital data that I purposely drive a car that does not have any Apple CarPlay or backup cameras or anything. So because of that, I didn't even think that this rental car, it never occurred to me to look for a backup camera. And the point I'm making is that to him, that never would have been a question. And so the acceptance of digital evidence being in the world is just more ingrained. And really, that story does make me sound old, right? Like I'm used to mirrors. Yeah,
I have a backup camera, but I still use my mirrors.
Yeah.
But you know what the good thing is? My 18-year-old, who is now a driver, right? Because he's 18. I taught him and he learned how to drive in a car that had no backup camera. So I feel he's a little more prepared. Too. Right. Yes. See, we're preparing our children. But nonetheless, 100%. And I agree. Continual training. And the reason you need it as part of the annual training is because it changes. And that really should be something that's relied upon the digital forensics lab to go out and ensure that we're educating our stakeholders, well, the people who are bringing us evidence, right, to make sure they understand what we need to be able to give them what they need. And that's the end of the deal. They're our customer, right?
Well, also, this kind of goes back to another episode that we have, which is working within your agency and, getting the message that can go, up the chain if need be. This may be one of those times where you absolutely need to be able to articulate to the folks that are, above you to say, here's what we need to do. And you may not even be asking for money at that point. You may just be asking for their, time.
You're asking for their time. You're volunteering your time and requesting their time. And that's actually a really good point, but you have to show, and really for citations for that, check out the episode and all of the links about how digital evidence is now more vulnerable on scene, and that preservation requires acquisition for mobile devices right in this day and age. I think it will be, there's enough material out there to arm you in having those conversations to try to educate your teams. Now, do you have concerns about the average enforcement
Yes.
law enforcement member going out and actually being responsible for seizing the device on scene? Debbie said yes
Yeah.
before I finished the question, so I know she's
Yes,
pertinent about
and it's rooted in this, in that it's a perishable skill. Like if you are not doing it, it's just like, I'll even equate it to defensive tactics in law enforcement, and other things that is CPR. And if you are not doing it all the time, you are going to, even something as minor as, am I giving chest compressions now and breaths, or just chest compressions, or how many of each? Okay, so I know that's like a different example, but if you are forgetting if you should turn the phone off or not, like because you learned it for 2 hours in one day a year, I think it's a perishable skill. So yes, I'm concerned that, and there's lots of things that are perishable skills, but if you're not using it all the time, then yeah.
I think also there's a little bit of I kind of feel like that you might have a lot of heroes out there, or think they're going to be a digital evidence hero after that. If you give them just a little bit of knowledge about, let them see a little bit behind the curtain in digital evidence, then then they
Overly
may feel
confident?
as,
Are you saying some law enforcement may be overly confident?
I didn't say that. I'm just saying, they may feel as though that they now have the keys to the kingdom, and they may, yeah, that's just my concern, is that they may take it to the next step when they need to know where the line is in terms of, this doesn't make them an examiner. This doesn't do
Right,
anything
right.
except help them
There are
to do
limitations.
their,
Then you,
yeah, this only helps you to do your changing frontline job. It's their job, but our job as an examiner is changing, but their frontline job is changing.
so I think too, communication between frontline, whoever is going to be identifying and seizing devices, and their examiner, and an open line of communication. Hey, I'm on scene and I've got this question. I have found this phone. It's in this state. This is what I think I'm supposed to do, but can you tell me? Like an open checks and balances line of communication would be good too.
Many years ago there was a little, I forget who made it, and I'd love to see it now because it's way outdated, but there was a little card that was given to, I forget which training it was, some training for law enforcement, but basically it was that if you were basically in the field and you can encounter a computer and it's on, okay, then do this. If you various things. So so
Mm-hmm.
even something like that you could just have and update it, or if it is someone who has an MDT in their car, maybe it's something that can be digital, where it can be updated and pushed to them regularly. You may have something along those lines.
So it would be really helpful to take that one graphic out of the best practices for mobile document from SWIG-DE. But I also would advocate that people. Debbie wrote a blog that actually was recently posted on Hexordia.com about training first responders in digital forensics evidence handling. And she makes three large points in her calls. She makes calls to action for both people, and we've been talking a lot about the call to action almost for digital forensics examiners, which is not what she spoke about, but she made some calls to action. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the calls of actions for patrol officers and detectives. You have three there, and it was advocating for change, educating your peers, and being a guardian of evidence. Can you give us a little bit about that, Debbie?
So you've heard me say it before. Advocating for change. If you know that something needs to change, or you need a specific tool, or you want to take a specific training, Um, I feel like some officers don't feel as though they can go to their command staff, but I feel like that advocating for change and bringing that conversation to their executive leadership, to their training coordinators, advocacy, and again, they don't always know if you don't tell them that this is needed. So advocating for change, telling them, hey, I am encountering a lot of digital evidence just on a regular patrol call, that may turn into an investigation. And I need to know how to handle that. And I'm not always sure I'm doing it correctly. Advocating for change, and then educating your peers. Hey, um, you know, the more officers who understand this the critical importance of digital evidence and proper evidence handling. Because, I don't know, I still get calls 4 years after retirement from law enforcement personnel who are calling me saying, hey, am I supposed to turn this phone off or leave it on?
Always leave it how it is. Maintain the state. Maintain the
Yes,
state.
yes.
Sorry, you just tricked my
I know.
me.
So,
Maintain the state.
but educating your peers that these things are important. And then, as Kim mentioned, sort of committing to this new way of thinking,
right,
of really looking at a crime scene or a call, a call for service in a different way, looking for digital evidence.
yeah, and the fact that it's I think the big change for frontline personnel is that it is now their job, right? Like
Yeah.
they previously it's not my job to find the SD cards and the computers and the phones and the Alexas and whatever else is in the crime scene, because they may be used to, well, somebody else is going to come in and do this. To be honest, lab personnel are getting flooded, and the best use of their skills may be back in the lab, extracting from devices that are not easily extracted from, and analyzing things that are not parsed by the tools. So it may be really interesting. And we did another episode, and I know you did another blog post, Debbie, on the difference between digital forensics technicians and digital forensics examiners. And I feel like what we're doing is we're introducing the first responder role as well.
Yes.
So there's the first responder, the digital forensics technician, and the digital forensics examiner. And something that excites me, I know we've talked about pathways before as well, something that excites me is that maybe somebody who is interested in this field and is coming out as someone earlier in their career, and maybe they're on patrol, they could see that path. Yes. Of going from being the first responder to the technician, and then one day to becoming the examiner. And that's kind of neat.
Absolutely. It used to be hard for us to find digital forensic examiners in law enforcement. A lot of the sworn people did not want to do it. And that is changing.
Well, we're sexy now.
I know. So, but I mean, people have also heard me say technology is the future of policing.
It is.
So, in a variety of ways, but especially in digital forensics world. So I do think that there would absolutely be patrol officers who would sort of think that this was a future pathway for them.
And that's really, really, really exciting.
It is.
It is. That's great. But, there again, it may be a good opportunity for, maybe as we talked about their continuing education and in-service that they have each year, maybe every couple of years you're able to have, for that 40 hours, you're able to actually have a training session for those new folks or people who have interest in coming over. So you may have a handful of people that are in the field that can kind of help and kind of be out there as, before they get the opportunity to actually come into specialized assignments. So.
Yeah. And I mean, I do know of agencies that do such programs where they do train these more technician roles, but they are out in the officer corps, not in the lab. And I think that that's another adjustment, which kind of brings to the other place you gave calls to action, Debbie. You also gave calls to action to law enforcement leaders and command staff. So, what would kind of be your advice? Not to those folks. I'd love it if they were listening. I don't think they're our core audience. If you are listening and you
So you have
are
to.
a law enforcement leader, we'd love to know. But yeah, what would be
I
your
always
advice for
ask.
those folks?
I always ask people to forward this to
Oh, wonderful.
their supervisor.
Well, because some of them are critical.
They're going to
so,
use it.
Yeah.
These arguments. A lot of the things that I write are for the examiners to use in their arguments to their police leaders. That's what
Absolutely.
I want them to do with these things. So, my calls to action for leaders was to, for one, listen to what their people are saying, but to prioritize training and make the proper handling and seizure of digital evidence, and as Kim pointed out, the identification of digital evidence, to make that a mandatory component of early training, of a department's training curriculum. And then, we've talked about this. It seems like we do talk about a lot of the same things, but invest in protocols, make a procedure, a written policy or procedure about how to seize digital evidence properly.
We did a really cool thing in the on-demand version of the IoT for law enforcement class that was under that DOJ-funded contract. Unfortunately, if you're listening to it, that class is no longer funded. We do have other IoT courses, but we did this cool thing, and I want to figure out how to use the technology elsewhere. We actually made a scene full of evidence, and we did a 360 camera record, and then we were able to make a little event where you go in, you tap on a piece of evidence, it tells you what it is, and then you selected seize or not seize and got it right or wrong. And it was completely in the on-demand, because we want to provide that experience in the on-demand of knowing when you walk into a space what to seize. So now you've got my ideas churning about other educational opportunities to employ that technology. And so I thought you'd kind of think that was neat, Debbie. And it
Yes.
takes like 5 minutes, right? It's not a long exercise. So even being able to create on-demand content for folks might be interesting. But that's me digressing and putting on my what can we do to serve the community hat.
Well, I mean, I have often thought about creating, like, say, a double-sided one pager with, that they could use in the field to seize evidence properly. There's just so many trees, like it would look like a tree.
So that really is the cool chart in the SWIG DE. I know we're going to put a reference to it, but it's got those two charts, and they are just phenomenal. They are very large decision trees, but they do cover other things that people are going to encounter on scene that need to be handled on scene. What happens if you encounter a device that's engrossed in water? What do you do if you encounter a device that's broken? What do you do if you encounter a device that, and I'm having dealt with a lot of suicide bombers, I was trying to think of a more polite term to use, with cases involving devices on suicide bombers. What do you do if it's engrossed in biological material? Like,
Right.
How do you deal with those devices on scene? Because those things can happen. And it is, that's all addressed in that flow chart, in making simple decisions about, do you collect it in its liquid? Do you take
Right.
it out of its liquid? Do you send it, what do you have to quickly send it for drying? Like, all of those things are addressed in that flow chart and in that document. So I really encourage agencies to download it. And the first chart is meant, the reason for separating them is really so you have a path for the lab and a path for the first responders. So although admittedly that document is highly technical when you get into reading the wording, right, as it has to be, because we need it for SOPs and being able to uphold and
Yeah, so that's what I feel. I mean, and I know that this is the reason why some of those documents are written, but law enforcement leaders, when they're updating their policies and procedures, what a great resource go and take the SWIG DE documents and use them as a
And I'm
resource.
going to give another argument for why police leaders need to think about training their patrol officers and detectives on digital evidence. Because if they are touching them at the scene, okay, well, first off, we don't want them thumbing devices because they are digital natives. But if they
Scroll analysis.
scroll analysis, right? If we, what happens when they have to testify to the actions they took with that phone and that they can't say that they were trained in the proper handling? Is this going to be something where the device could get thrown out and not admittable and everything from it's fruited to poisonous because it was mishandled? And by mishandled, not that they did anything wrong, but that they weren't properly trained in what to do. And obviously, if they're not trained in what to do, things can go wrong. But even if they did it right, and I'm thinking again of Federal Rules of Evidence 502, I'm thinking of the requirement of training for the things that you've done in a certain specified period of time, showing that you have to have recent training. It really does come to, should digital evidence handling or digital evidence handling 101 be part of basic training for folks? And I would say, speaking of free resources, we do have a mobile device preservation class. It probably takes folks about 30 minutes to complete. That is free and available at learn.hexordia.com. So if you go to mobile classes and scroll down to the free classes, you will see one on mobile device preservation. And that might be a good start for people to take a look at.
Absolutely.
So yeah, well, Kim and I have spent a lot of time trying to put some resources out there. I would say that I think that is, it wasn't specifically designed for patrol officers and detectives. However, I think it is
It's
a
basic
base level
enough.
class
Hmm.
that it
Hmm.
100% can be attended by anyone. It was intended for people who are new to forensics, but I think that might be a good start and might be a good reference for folks just in that basics. And yes, that's specific to mobile, but to be honest, it's most of what's out there. When I speak to agencies, they're like 90+% of what they're seeing now is mobile.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Well, I think this has been really cool, really thinking about how the what the digital forensics detective what the detective of the future is going to be looking at, and how digital forensics is going to be a part of their role, if they like it or not, and that it really is time to bring in the right training resources. I urge anyone who is interested in this episode, please check out Debbie's blog. It's called Training First Responders in Digital Evidence Handling. It's up now on the Hexordia resources blog page. So again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.